Now, I know you've learned this before, but too much sugar in the bloodstream is referred to as hyperglycemia, emia being in the blood, glyce being related to glucose, and then hyper, too much. So this is considered to be fasting blood glucose levels greater than 150 milligrams per deciliter. And if you look at the memory jogger on page 311, you can see, well, there's two memory joggers. The top one talks about some features of diabetes, and then the bottom one are early and late signs of hyperglycemia, what you can expect to see when your blood sugar is too high. Hypoglycemia is blood glucose less than 60 milligrams per deciliter. And the second memory jogger on page 312 gives you some of the signs and symptoms of hypoglycemia, not enough blood in the blood sugar. The person who produces enough insulin isn't usually going to have really super high levels of glucose in their blood, especially if they haven't eaten all night, because their food from the day before has already been processed. You're also usually not going to see big drops in blood sugar in the person who's got a sufficient negative feedback system. Generally, you see hypoglycemia in the non-diabetic person just because they don't eat. And so they get that dizziness and that clamminess. And we've all probably had that experience. We get busy, we don't think about it, and so we don't eat enough, or what we do eat is so sugary that it spikes our blood sugar and then really drops. But it's very rare for somebody to have a hypoglycemia where their blood glucose just plummets for no reason. And if they do that, then they need to look for a tumor on the pancreas, a tumor in the pituitary, something that's causing some kind of problem and causing their blood sugar to drop. Usually it's just the person isn't eating right or isn't eating enough. Gestational diabetes is diabetes that occurs as a result of pregnancy. Generally speaking, it's easily controlled with diet during and in the period right after delivery, and it goes away. Occasionally somebody might need a medication, but usually it's going to clear up with pregnancy or with delivery. Now, it can indicate a slightly higher chance of getting type 2 diabetes in later life. So the person who had gestational diabetes should probably kind of keep an eye on themselves as they approach middle age and older. Gestational diabetes used to really be rare. Now we see a little more of it than we used to, just because women tend to go into pregnancy weighing more than they did 20 or 30 years ago. And the risk is that with too much glucose in the blood, the fetus can gain weight a lot more rapidly. And that would be something we'd see. And fetuses don't develop more rapidly. Their lungs are still undeveloped. Their nervous system and everything is still undeveloped. If they're delivered early, they're still going to have signs and symptoms of prematurity, but they're going to be really, really big. And that makes it difficult during delivery, of course, if you've got a really big baby. So it was kind of sad to see babies of diabetic moms, because sometimes they would be delivered at 36 or 37 weeks and they were still, it kind of hampered their development, so their lungs wouldn't be good. So you'd see this like huge, otherwise healthy looking baby lying there just, struggling to breathe. And so because the lungs weren't developed properly. So it's very important to control weight and control type 2 diabetes in pregnancy. So the first thing we're going to talk about are oral hypoglycemics. There's no such thing as oral insulin. If anybody says, oh, well, I take, I don't have to give myself shots, I take oral insulin. No, they don't, because they haven't found a way to make insulin be able to survive the very acidic climate of the stomach. So what you have are drugs that work in various ways to lower the blood sugar, but they're not insulin. So you probably can't see here, but these are just, it's a little representation of the PO drugs that a person can take. So you can look closer at it when you're looking at your own PowerPoint up on the screen. So there are quite a few, as you can see, so don't let it scare you though, because they all kind of work basically the same way. On page 312, we have a memory jogger that gives the 8 categories of non-insulin anti-diabetic drugs. And they do one of two things. They either stimulate the pancreas, the beta cells of the pancreas, to release more insulin than they're making, or they work on the cells of the body to make you less less resistant to the insulin. Now, sometimes just one drug, what they call monotherapy, works just fine. Other times, somebody might have a combination of drugs. But these give the 8 classes, and I won't, take up a bunch of time by reading them. You can read those yourself, but I'll explain the different types of drugs and what a prototype drug is. So the first type of non-insulin anti-diabetic drug is talked about in the table on page 313, and they're known as insulin stimulators. They stimulate the body to make more insulin. Now, the good thing to remember is with all these drugs, your most common adverse reaction is going to be hypoglycemia. They can lower your blood sugar too much. So you don't have to learn all kinds of different adverse reactions. Biggest thing, they can drop your blood sugar. You also could be allergic to something, but that's true of any drug. But hypoglycemia is your big adverse effect, negative effect that you have to watch out for. So our first category of insulin stimulators are drugs that are also known as sulfonylureas. And they come in a couple different generations. Now, all of these drugs have a possibility of interacting badly with other drugs. The drug I just told you about, the sulfonylureas, are chemically related to the thiazide sulfonamide diuretics, and so they can decrease the effectiveness of your sulfonylureal drugs that we're going to talk about. So sulfonamides, sulfonylureas, they're not going to work really well, and the person taking maybe like hydrochlorothiazide and a sulfonylurea, that's hard to say, is going to find that the blood sugar doesn't go any lower. Any diabetic drug with alcohol, not going to work really well. The rule of thumb is the person, if they want to drink socially, they should only have one drink, and they should not start drinking until they sit down to eat a meal. Oral diabetic meds can also reduce how your oral contraceptives work. So females need to keep that in mind.